The thunder arrives first, rolling across the mountains like a warning I should have heeded 24 years ago. I stand in the kitchen of a cabin that feels both foreign and achingly familiar, my hands wrapped around a coffee mug that has gone cold. The porcelain is chipped along the rim, the same chip that was there when Julian and I were 22 and thought we had all the time in the world to figure out who we were supposed to become. The lights flicker once, twice, then surrender to the storm. Darkness swallows the room whole, and I find myself reaching for the counter to steady myself, though I'm not sure if it's the sudden blindness or the weight of memory that threatens to unbalance me. My fingers find the drawer where I remember candles used to live. They're still there, along with a box of matches that strikes on the third try. The flame catches, casting shadows that dance across walls I haven't seen illuminated in over 2 decades. I set the single candle on the kitchen table, the same scarred pine surface where Julian and I once spread our textbooks during those college summers, pretending to study while stealing glances at each other when we thought the other wasn't looking. The wax pools slowly, and I watch it the way I used to watch Julian's hands when he wrote, mesmerized by something I couldn't name then and have spent half my life trying to forget. Rain begins to tap against the windows with increasing urgency, each drop like a finger pressed to glass, urging me to remember what I came here to bury. The sound grows louder, more insistent, until it becomes a drumbeat that matches the rhythm of my pulse. I twist my wedding ring, a habit I've developed over the years when anxiety threatens to surface, and the gold band slides easily around my finger, looser than it used to be. The door creaks. It's a sound I recognize, a complaint the old hinges have been making since before I was born. My breath catches in my throat, and for a moment I consider blowing out the candle, sitting in darkness until whoever it is decides I'm not here and leaves. But my hand remains frozen above the flame, and I listen to footsteps cross the threshold, deliberate and unhurried, as if they belong here more than I do. I wasn't sure you'd come. The voice is deeper now, roughened by years of cigarettes he quit and started again, by laughter and arguments and conversations I wasn't part of. But it's unmistakably his. Julian's voice has always carried something extra in it, a warmth that seems to reach across whatever distance exists between him and whoever he's speaking to. I hear it now, that same quality that used to make me lean closer when he read aloud from books we were supposed to be discussing for class. I turn toward the sound, though I can barely make out his silhouette in the doorway. The candlelight doesn't reach that far, and the storm has stolen what little evening light might have remained. He steps inside, and I catch the familiar rhythm of his walk, the slight favor he gives his left leg from an old hiking injury that happened the summer before everything changed. Neither of us speaks for a long moment. The air between us feels thick, charged with more than just the electricity of the storm. It carries the weight of 24 years of silence, of Christmas cards never sent, of phone calls that started with dialing 7 digits before hanging up. It carries the ghost of who we used to be and the strangers we've become. He moves deeper into the room, and I see him more clearly in the candlelight. Gray threads run through his dark hair now, and lines map his face in ways that speak of a life I know nothing about. But his eyes are the same, that particular shade of brown that reminded me of coffee with too much cream, warm and inviting and dangerous in their honesty. The cabin was always our sanctuary during those college summers. Julian's Uncle Eli owned it then, a gruff man who smelled like pipe tobacco and let us stay here for weeks at a time, as long as we kept the place clean and didn't burn it down. We'd drive up from campus with books we swore we'd read and papers we promised ourselves we'd write, and instead we'd spend our days hiking trails that led nowhere important and our nights talking about everything except the thing that mattered most. Now Uncle Eli is gone, and Julian inherited this place along with whatever ghosts it contains. The phone call came 3 weeks ago, Julian's voice on my answering machine at home, careful and formal, explaining about the funeral I missed and the will that surprised everyone. He left a number where I could reach him, but it took me 18 days to work up the courage to dial it. "I haven't seen you in 24 years, I said when he answered. "I know," he replied, "but some things don't change." Now he pours himself a drink from a bottle I don't remember him bringing in and offers me the same. The whiskey burns in a way that feels appropriate, a small punishment for being here at all. We sit at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the candle flame creating a small circle of light that somehow makes the darkness beyond it seem deeper. Lightning splits the sky outside, illuminating the room for a brief, stark moment. In that flash, I see Julian clearly. Not just his face, but the way he's looking at me, with an expression I recognize from all those years ago. It's the look he used to get when he was trying to solve a problem, when he was working through the steps of something complicated and important. It's the look that used to make my stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The thunder follows, shaking the cabin's old bones, and then we're back in candlelight and shadow. Julian takes a sip of his drink and then another, and I realize he's nervous. The discovery surprises me. Julian was never nervous, not in college, not about anything. He was the one who talked to professors after class, who asked questions that made everyone else squirm, who seemed to navigate the world with a confidence I envied and feared in equal measure. "You know I'm not trying to mess with your life," he says finally, his voice quiet but clear. The words hang between us like smoke. I study his face in the flickering light, looking for some sign of what he means, what he wants, why he called me here after all this time. But Julian has always been good at hiding what he doesn't want to share, and tonight is no exception. "You're not," I tell him, and even as I say it, I know it's not entirely true. My life was already fragile before I made the drive up here, already balanced on the edge of something I didn't want to examine too closely. Coming here didn't create the cracks, it just made them impossible to ignore. It's already messed. The admission surprises me. I'm not someone who confesses easily, who admits weakness or uncertainty. 21 years of marriage have taught me to keep my doubts private, to present a steady front no matter what storms might be brewing inside. But something about this place, about Julian's presence, strips away the careful composure I've spent decades building. Another flash of lightning, brighter this time, and the thunder comes almost immediately. The storm is directly overhead now, and the old cabin seems to tremble under its assault. The lights flicker once more, then die completely, taking with them the last pretense that this is just a casual reunion between old friends. Julian shifts in his chair, and I become aware of how much closer we're sitting than we were when the evening began. Each time the darkness has claimed us, each time we've been forced to rely on candlelight and storm flash to see each other, the distance between us has somehow shortened. Now our knees are almost touching under the table, and when he reaches for his glass, his shoulder brushes against mine. I should move away. I should make some excuse about needing air or wanting to check if the power might come back on. Instead, I sit perfectly still, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his breathing has changed in the darkness, becoming slower and more deliberate. The room smells like it always did, old pine and wood smoke and something indefinable that might be memory itself. But underneath those familiar scents, I catch something else, the particular combination of soap and skin that belongs only to Julian, unchanged after all these years. It's a smell that used to make me want to move closer and run away at the same time, and apparently that hasn't changed either. The candle flame wavers in a draft I can't feel, creating shadows that shift and dance across the walls. In the uncertain light, Julian's face becomes younger and older by turns, and I find myself remembering not just who he was, but who I was when I was with him. The person I used to be before I learned to edit myself, before I discovered that some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud. Outside, the storm rages on, but inside this small circle of candlelight, time seems suspended. We sit in the growing darkness, two middle-aged men carrying the ghosts of the boys we used to be, and wait for whatever comes next. My name is Nathaniel Monroe, and I teach English literature to teenagers who think Shakespeare is a foreign language. I've been doing this for 19 years, standing in front of the same chalkboard in the same classroom, parsing the same poems about love and loss and the things we do to survive both. My students call me Mr. Monroe, and I've grown comfortable with the distance that title provides. At home, I am something else entirely. Husband to Vanessa for 21 years this October. Father to Emma, who calls from college every Sunday with stories about professors and parties and boys whose names I forget before she finishes telling me about them. Father to David, who still lives with us and speaks to me in grunts and shrugs, the way 17-year-old boys communicate with their fathers when they're trying to figure out what kind of man they want to become. Our house sits on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the school where I work. It's a colonial with blue shutters that Vanessa painted herself the summer after David was born. The front yard is tidy, bordered by hostas that bloom white in July and die back to nothing by October. Inside, the walls are covered with photographs, family vacations to the shore, Christmas mornings, birthday parties where everyone is smiling at the camera instead of at each other. These photos feel more like evidence than memory. Evidence of a life lived according to plan, of choices made and commitments kept. Vanessa arranged them in careful chronological order, a visual timeline of our family's progression from young couple to established household. Sometimes I catch myself studying them as if they belong to strangers, trying to locate the moment when performance became reality, or if it ever did. I am meticulous in the way that quiet men often are. Each morning, I drink coffee from the same blue ceramic mug, chipped along the handle from the time David knocked it off the counter when he was 8. I sit in the same pew at St. Mary's every Sunday, third row from the back on the left side, where I can see everyone without being seen. After dinner, I walk our golden retriever, Chester, along the same route through our neighborhood, past houses where other families are settling into their evening routines behind lit windows. People who know me would describe me as reliable, steady, perhaps a little reserved. They wouldn't call me unhappy, but they wouldn't call me joyful either. I exist in the space between contentment and resignation, and most days that feels like enough. My love for literature has always been about what exists in the silence between words, the things authors don't say, but somehow communicate anyway. I teach my students to look for subtext, to understand that the most important conversations in great books happen underneath the dialogue. It's a skill I've become too good at in my own life, reading the spaces between what people say, including myself. In our attic, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and David's outgrown baseball equipment, there is a shoebox sealed with layers of silver duct tape. I put it there the week after my wedding, and I haven't touched it since. But I know exactly what it contains. A cassette tape with my own voice reading poems I wrote in college, a photograph of 2 young men laughing on a dock somewhere in Pennsylvania, their shirts abandoned on the wooden planks behind them, and a note written in handwriting I recognize better than my own. The note says simply, "Don't forget." I have spent 21 years trying to do exactly that. Vanessa moves through our life with a grace I've never possessed. She speaks for both of us at dinner parties, remembering the names of colleagues' children and asking about vacations and home renovations. She plans our social calendar, coordinates our family gatherings, maintains the friendships that keep us connected to the community we've built. I play my role well. The thoughtful husband who listens more than he speaks, who nods at appropriate moments and laughs when expected. But there are times when I feel like I'm watching our life from behind glass, present but separate, participating but not quite inhabiting the moments as they happen. Vanessa seems to understand this about me without needing it explained. She fills the silences I create, answers questions directed at me when I take too long to respond, covers for my absences even when I'm standing right there. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in March, mixed in with bills and advertisements and a catalog Vanessa had ordered for kitchen supplies she would never buy. I recognized Julian's handwriting immediately, the way he formed his letters with more care than necessary, as if each word deserved individual attention. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with my name written in the same blue ink he used to use for everything important. Inside, the note was brief, almost formal. Uncle Eli passed. He left me the cabin, coming up for the weekend to sort things. If you want to say goodbye properly, come. At the bottom, an address I knew by heart and a date 2 weeks away. I read the note 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker, where Vanessa would be sure to see it. Then I went upstairs and stood outside the attic door for 10 minutes, my hand on the knob, before walking away without opening it. Vanessa found the note that evening while I was grading papers at the kitchen table. She picked it up with the casual curiosity she applied to all our mail, scanning it quickly before looking at me with raised eyebrows. "Old friend?" she asked. "From school," I told her, not looking up from the essay I was marking. A student had written about Gatsby's green light, comparing it to hope that exists only in the distance. "Anyone I know?" I shook my head without meeting her eyes. "No." She studied the note for another moment, then placed it back on the counter exactly where I had left it. If she was curious about why someone from my college years was suddenly reaching out after decades of silence, she didn't say so. Vanessa has always been careful not to push too hard into corners of my past that I haven't offered to share. The note stayed on the counter for 3 days, moved only when Vanessa wiped down the surface around it. Each morning I saw it there, and each morning I told myself I would throw it away after breakfast. But something about Julian's careful handwriting, about the phrase goodbye properly, kept me from following through. On Friday, I called the number he had written at the bottom of the page. The drive north takes 3 hours through mountains that grow taller and more familiar with each mile. I tell Vanessa I'm going to help Professor Whitman's widow sort through his papers, a lie that comes so easily it frightens me. She packs me sandwiches in wax paper and reminds me to call when I arrive safely, the same way she's done for every trip I've taken in the past 2 decades. The highways give way to smaller roads, then to the winding mountain route I remember from college summers when Julian and I would make this drive with windows down and music too loud, our textbooks forgotten in the back seat. Now I keep the radio off and the windows up, needing the silence to prepare for whatever waits at the end of this journey. The cabin appears smaller than it did in memory, tucked between pine trees that have grown taller in my absence. The same gravel driveway, the same weathered cedar shingles, the same front porch where Julian's Uncle Eli used to sit with his pipe and his crossword puzzles. But something about the proportions feels wrong, as if the building has shrunk while I've been away, or perhaps I've simply grown larger in ways that have nothing to do with physical size. Julian's car is already there, a blue Honda with Pennsylvania plates and a dent in the rear bumper that suggests a life more adventurous than the one I've been living. I park beside it and sit for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of cooling metal and the whisper of wind through branches overhead. He appears on the porch before I've worked up the courage to get out of the car. 24 years have added weight to his frame and lines to his face, but he moves with the same unhurried confidence I remember. His hair is shorter now, more gray than brown, and he's grown a beard that makes him look distinguished in a way that suits him. When he raises his hand in greeting, I see that he's not wearing a wedding ring. We embrace briefly on the porch, a careful, masculine hug that lasts exactly the right amount of time to be appropriate between old friends. But when he pulls away, his hand lingers on my shoulder for a moment longer than necessary, and I feel something shift in my chest, a recognition that bypasses 24 years of careful forgetting. Inside, dust covers everything except 2 chairs that have been pulled close to the stone fireplace and a kitchen table cleared of debris. Cardboard boxes line the walls, filled with the accumulated possessions of a man who lived simply but kept everything. The cabin smells like old wood and mouse droppings and something else underneath, the ghost of summers when this place meant sanctuary instead of reckoning. There's only one bed, a double mattress in the room that used to be Uncle Eli's. Julian has made it up with sheets that smell like fabric softener, and I realize he's been here for several days already, preparing for my arrival in ways I hadn't expected. The intimacy of this preparation unsettles me, the assumption that I would come, the care taken to make me comfortable, the single bed that acknowledges what we've both been trying not to think about. We spend the first few hours sorting through boxes with the methodical efficiency of 2 men who need a task to make conversation possible. Uncle Eli kept everything: field guides to birds and wildflowers, topographical maps of hiking trails we used to explore, photographs of family gatherings and fishing trips, and quiet moments captured on film. Julian handles each item with reverence, as if his uncle's life deserves careful attention even in its dismantling. We stumble upon a photograph that stops us both. It's tucked between the pages of a book about mountain flora, Julian and me at 22, standing on the dock behind the cabin. I have my hand on his shoulder, and we're both laughing at something outside the frame. We look impossibly young, impossibly free, our faces open in a way that makes my chest ache with recognition and loss. Julian holds the photograph for a long moment, studying it as if it contains secrets he's forgotten. "We were so close," he says finally, his voice soft with something that might be regret. "Too close, maybe. I don't know how to respond to this." Too close suggests boundaries that should have been maintained, lines that shouldn't have been crossed. But looking at the photograph, at the easy intimacy between those 2 young men, I can't remember what those boundaries were supposed to protect us from, or whom. The power cuts out during dinner. canned soup heated on a camp stove Julian found in one of the boxes. We eat by candlelight like campers or monks, our faces flickering in and out of shadow as the flames dance in the draft from windows that don't quite seal. Outside, I can hear the wind picking up, the first whispers of the storm that drove me here last night. Julian pours wine from a bottle he's brought with him, a red that tastes expensive and complicated. The alcohol loosens something in both of us, makes conversation easier and more dangerous at the same time. We talk about Uncle Eli, about the summers we spent here, about professors and classmates whose names I haven't spoken in decades. But we don't talk about my family, and Julian doesn't ask. Each time the lights flicker and fail, we find ourselves sitting closer together, as if the darkness requires proximity for safety. It's a gradual migration, a shift here, an adjustment there, until our shoulders are nearly touching and I can feel the warmth radiating from his body. When he reaches across the table for the wine bottle, his forearm brushes against mine, and neither of us moves away. That night, I lie awake on the couch Julian has made up for me with blankets that smell like cedar and memory. He's in the bedroom, and I can hear his breathing through the thin walls, slow and steady, the rhythm of someone who sleeps without guilt or complication. I stare at the ceiling and listen to the wind building outside, and I remember the last night we spent in this cabin 24 years ago. It was the summer after graduation, before we were supposed to scatter to graduate school and jobs and the lives other people had planned for us. We'd been drinking Uncle Eli's whiskey and talking about the future with the confidence of young men who believe they could shape the world to their desires. And then, sometime after midnight, Julian had kissed me. It wasn't the first time, but it was the last. The kiss that tasted like whiskey and possibility and the terrible knowledge that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I kissed him back with everything I had, and then I spent the rest of the night packing my things while he slept, leaving before dawn without explanation or goodbye. The storm begins in earnest now, rattling the windows and sending branches scraping against the roof. In the darkness of the living room, I twist my wedding ring and listen to the cabin settle around me. And I wonder if Julian is lying awake too, remembering that same night, that same kiss, and the coward who left him to wake up alone. Morning arrives with the kind of crystalline clarity that only follows a storm. The power is still out, but sunlight streams through windows Uncle Eli never bothered to cover with curtains, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits in the air. Julian is already awake, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee brewed over the camp stove, watching me with the patient attention of someone who has been waiting for me to surface from whatever dreams kept me restless through the night. We decide to walk the old trails after breakfast, an unspoken agreement that movement might be easier than sitting still with all the words we're not saying. Julian fills a thermos with coffee, and I find the hiking boots I remembered to pack, though I'm not sure why I brought them. Perhaps some part of me knew we would need to walk through more than just the forest. The trail behind the cabin leads up through stands of pine and oak, following a creek that runs fuller than I remember, swollen with last night's rain. Julian sets an easy pace, pausing occasionally to point out wildflowers or the tracks of animals that pass this way before us. He hums as he walks, fragments of songs I used to play on the guitar I carried everywhere in college, melodies I haven't thought about in years but somehow still remember. We don't talk much, but everything said carries the weight of what remains unspoken. Julian mentions that he's been coming here twice a year since Uncle Eli turned 70, helping with maintenance and keeping the old man company during the winters that grew too quiet. I learned that he never married, never settled into the conventional life that seemed inevitable when we were 22 and thought we understood what the world expected from us. He stops at a clearing where wild blueberry bushes grow in tangled profusion, their branches heavy with fruit that won't be ready for another month. But Julian picks a few of the ripest berries anyway, rolling them between his fingers to test their firmness before offering them to me. I watch the way his hands move, careful, deliberate, as if he's performing a ritual whose meaning I've forgotten, but my body still remembers. The berries are tart and sweet, tasting like summer and possibility. Julian smiles when I tell him this, and for a moment his face becomes young again, transformed by the same expression I remember from those long-ago afternoons when we would lie in the grass behind the cabin and read to each other from books we were supposed to be studying alone. Back at the cabin, we drink more wine than is probably wise for two men who are already walking the edge of something that could reshape everything. Julian becomes more candid as the afternoon deepens, speaking about the relationships that didn't work, the compromises he refused to make, the decision to live honestly even when honesty made life more complicated. He tells me about Michael, who lasted 3 years before deciding he wanted children and a house in the suburbs with neighbors who would never question their right to be there. About David, not my David, but another man with the same name, who loved Julian enough to ask him to move to San Francisco, but not enough to wait when Julian said he wasn't ready to leave Pennsylvania behind. Julian speaks of these men with tenderness but without regret, as if each relationship was a chapter in a story he's still writing rather than a failure to be mourned. He's learned to live with loneliness, he says, the way some people learn to live with chronic pain, acknowledging its presence without letting it define the shape of each day. I listen to these confessions like they're scripture, drinking wine and watching the way Julian's face changes as he talks about the life he's built for himself. It's a life I can barely imagine, one where authenticity takes precedence over approval, where truth matters more than comfort. The courage this requires seems enormous to me, almost superhuman in its demands. As evening approaches, Julian tells me the story I've been waiting to hear without knowing I was waiting for it. He speaks about the morning 24 years ago when he woke up alone in the cabin, finding only a note I'd left on the kitchen table. A note that said simply, "I can't. I'm sorry. You kissed me like it meant something," Julian says, his voice quiet but steady. "Then you left like it didn't." The words hang between us like an accusation, but there's no anger in his voice, only the patient sadness of someone who has spent decades trying to understand a hurt that never quite healed. I realize that all these years, while I've been building a life designed to forget that kiss, Julian has been carrying it with him like a stone in his pocket, not heavy enough to cripple him, but present enough to remind him daily of what was lost. I am silent for a long time, watching the wine move in my glass and trying to find words for something I've never been able to explain, even to myself. Finally, I tell him the truth that I've been running from for more than half my life. It meant everything, I say. That's why I left. The admission hangs in the air between us, and I see Julian's face change as he processes what I've just confessed. The kiss didn't mean nothing. It meant too much. It meant a life I wasn't brave enough to choose, a version of myself I wasn't ready to become. It meant disappointing people who had already decided who I was supposed to be, including myself. The next blackout comes just as the sun disappears behind the trees, plunging us into darkness more complete than the previous night. This time, Julian doesn't reach for candles. We sit in the black silence, and I feel rather than see him leaning closer, searching for the wine bottle in the darkness. His hand finds my thigh instead. The touch is light, accidental, the back of his knuckles brushing against the fabric of my jeans as he reaches across the space between us. But neither of us moves away. Neither of us apologizes or makes light of the contact. We sit in the darkness with his hand resting against my leg, and the silence becomes something alive and breathing, full of all the words we've never been able to say. "This shouldn't be happening," I whisper, though I make no move to change it. "It already is," Julian replies, and his voice is so close I can feel his breath against my cheek. Outside, the wind picks up again, promising another storm. But inside the cabin, in the darkness that makes confession possible, we sit with 24 years of want and regret and the terrible, beautiful knowledge that some things, once acknowledged, can never be taken back. The final night arrives with a fury that makes the previous storms seem like gentle rehearsals. Rain hammers the cabin's roof with the persistence of something that has been waiting 24 years to be heard, and wind tears through the trees with a sound like voices raised in argument. The power, which had flickered back to life briefly during the afternoon, surrenders again to the storm's assault, leaving us trapped in a darkness that feels absolute. Julian and I move through the cabin like ghosts, lighting candles with the careful ritual of people who understand that some conversations require the intimacy of uncertain light. The electricity is out, the phone line is dead, and my cell phone shows no signal, a fact that should make me anxious but instead brings a strange sense of relief. For the first time in decades, I am completely unreachable, accountable to no one except the man sitting across from me, and the truth we've been circling like hunters tracking dangerous prey. Julian disappears into Uncle Eli's bedroom and returns carrying something I recognize before he sets it on the table between us. The tape recorder is ancient, probably from the 1980s, its black plastic case scarred by years of use. Uncle Eli used to record bird songs with it. I remember sitting on the porch at dawn with the microphone pointed toward the woods, capturing sounds he would play back during winter evenings when the silence grew too heavy. Remember this? Julian asks, though his tone suggests he knows I do. Inside the recorder is a cassette tape I haven't seen in 24 years, but could describe in perfect detail. The clear plastic case slightly cracked along one edge, my name written in Julian's careful handwriting on the white label. He made this recording the summer after our sophomore year, the summer I spent writing poems I was too afraid to show anyone except him. Julian presses play, and my own voice fills the cabin, young, uncertain, reading words I wrote when I still believed that poetry could save me from becoming the person everyone expected me to be. The quality is poor, tinny through the old speakers, but I can hear everything in those recorded sentences. The hope, the fear, the desperate honesty of someone who had not yet learned that truth is a luxury most people cannot afford. I love him, my younger self says through the static, but I cannot say it aloud. The poem continues, something about shadows and sunlight, about the space between what we want and what we allow ourselves to have. But I stop listening to the words and focus instead on the voice speaking them. This stranger who sounds like me but possesses a courage I seem to have misplaced somewhere along the way. When did I stop writing? When did I decide that teaching other people's words was safer than risking my own? Julian stops the tape before the poem ends. In the silence that follows, I can hear the storm raging outside and the sound of my own breathing, shallow and quick, as if I've been running. I never stopped wondering what might have happened if you stayed, he says. The words hit me with the force of physical contact. All these years, while I've been constructing a life designed to answer that question, while I've been proving to myself that leaving was the right choice, that convention was safer than chaos, Julian has been carrying the weight of possibility. He's been living with the ghost of the life we might have built together, the love story we abandoned before it could properly begin. And then, finally, inevitably, I kiss him. It happens without conscious decision, as if my body has been moving toward this moment for 24 years while my mind was busy with other things. One moment we are sitting across from each other in candlelight, and the next I am leaning forward, reaching for him, pressing my lips against his with the desperate urgency of someone who has been holding his breath underwater and finally surfaces. The kiss is hesitant at first, tentative, as if we're both afraid that too much enthusiasm might shatter whatever fragile agreement has brought us to this point. But then Julian's hand finds the back of my neck, and something inside me breaks open. Not breaks apart, but breaks open, like a seed that has been waiting in darkness for the right conditions to grow. When we separate, I am crying. The tears come without warning, without shame, carrying with them the weight of every year I've spent pretending to be someone else. I cry for the young man on the tape who believed his love was worth recording, worth preserving. I cry for the mornings I've woken up next to Vanessa feeling like an imposter in my own life. I cry for my children, who deserve a father who knows how to be fully present instead of always watching from behind glass. But mostly I cry from the overwhelming grief of all the years lost, all the conversations we never had, all the ordinary moments of love and frustration and daily tenderness that we sacrificed to my fear. Julian holds my hand while I weep, his thumb tracing circles on my palm the way he used to do when we were 22 and thought we had all the time in the world to figure out how to be brave. He doesn't try to comfort me with words or promises. He simply sits with me in the darkness and lets me mourn the life I chose and the life I abandoned with equal intensity. When I can speak again, I tell him about Vanessa. Not about our marriage as institution or obligation, but about the woman herself, kind, intelligent, deserving of a husband who can love her completely instead of apologetically. I tell him about my children, about the ways I've tried to be a good father while never quite understanding what that means for someone like me. I married her because it was easier, I confess, because it gave me a life people approved of, because I thought if I performed normalcy long enough, it might become real. Julian listens without judgment, his face serious in the flickering candlelight. When I finish, he squeezes my hand once, gently. But I never felt more real than I did with you, I tell him. And even as I say it, I know that this admission changes everything. Julian holds my hand tighter. You still can, he says. Outside, the storm reaches its crescendo, battering the cabin with rain and wind that sounds like the world ending. But inside, in the circle of candlelight where we sit with our hands intertwined and our truths finally spoken, it feels like the world is just beginning. Morning arrives like a judgment. The storm has passed, leaving behind the kind of crystalline silence that makes every sound feel amplified. The drip of water from eaves, the creak of settling wood, the careful rustle of fabric as I fold my clothes into the same bag I packed 3 days ago in another lifetime. Julian doesn't ask me to stay. He moves through the cabin with the quiet efficiency of someone who has learned not to expect promises from people who have already broken them once. He makes coffee on the camp stove and sets a cup beside me without comment, understanding perhaps that words would only complicate what is already impossibly complex. I pack in silence, each item a small act of betrayal. The hiking boots that carried me through yesterday's walk. The sweater that smells like wood smoke and confession. The book I brought but never opened, its pages still crisp with the assumption that I would need distraction from whatever waited for me here. When my bag is closed and sitting by the door, Julian places the cassette tape in my hand. The plastic case is warm from his palm, and I can feel the slight give of the worn label under my thumb. Whatever you choose, he says, his voice steady but soft, remember who you are. The drive home reverses yesterday's journey in more ways than geography. The mountains shrink behind me, giving way to highways and suburbs, and the familiar landscape of the life I built to contain myself. But something fundamental has shifted. The man behind the wheel is not the same person who made this trip 3 days ago, and I'm not sure he ever can be again. I arrive home to find Vanessa in the garden, deadheading roses with the methodical attention she brings to all tasks that require patience. She looks up when she hears the car, her face brightening with the genuine pleasure she always shows at my return, and I feel something inside my chest crack open with the weight of what I'm about to destroy. How was Professor Whitman's widow? She asks, pulling off her gardening gloves as she walks toward me. I tell her it was difficult, which is true in ways she cannot imagine. She nods with understanding, linking her arm through mine as we walk toward the house, and I am struck by how easily kindness and deception can coexist, how love and betrayal can occupy the same gesture. That night, I don't sleep. I lie beside Vanessa and listen to her breathing, the soft, trusting rhythm of someone who believes the world is exactly as it appears. In the darkness, I play the cassette tape on the old boombox we keep in the bedroom. The volume turns so low that only I can hear my younger self speaking truths I spent decades trying to silence. I love him, my recorded voice whispers into the night, but I cannot say it aloud. The irony is devastating. Here I am, 24 years later, finally able to say it aloud, but to the wrong person, in the wrong room, beside the wrong sleeping body. The poem continues, line after line of longing preserved in magnetic tape, and I realize that some truths don't diminish with time. They only grow more urgent, more impossible to ignore. The next morning, I sit across from Vanessa at our kitchen table, the same table where we've shared thousands of meals and conversations, where we've discussed grocery lists and vacation plans, and all the small negotiations that comprise a shared life. But today, the familiar ritual of coffee and morning light feels like a performance I can no longer sustain. She's reading the local paper, commenting on school board elections and restaurant openings, her voice carrying the comfortable assumption that this morning is like all the mornings that preceded it. I watch her face as she talks, the way her eyes move across the page, the small furrow that appears between her eyebrows when she reads something that puzzles her, and I understand that I am about to change everything for someone who didn't ask for change. Vanessa, I say, and something in my voice makes her look up from the paper. There's a part of me I buried before I ever met you. I tell her, the words coming slowly, carefully, like stones placed one at a time to build a bridge I'm not sure will hold our weight. And it's been clawing its way out. She sets down the paper with deliberate precision, folding it along its creases before placing it beside her coffee cup. Her face doesn't change expression immediately, but I see something flicker in her eyes. Not surprise, exactly, but recognition. As if she's been waiting for this conversation without knowing she was waiting for it. The silence stretches between us, filled with the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant sound of our neighbor mowing his lawn. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life continuing while ours quietly fractures. I always wondered, she says finally, her voice steady but quieter than usual. I just didn't want to know. The admission hangs in the air between us, and I realize that Vanessa has spent our entire marriage carrying her own burden of unspoken knowledge. She's seen the distance I maintain, even in intimacy, the careful way I've constructed my affection for her, the subtle wrongness that no amount of good intentions could entirely disguise. We sit in silence for a long time after that, two people who have loved each other as well as they could while knowing it was not the way either of them needed to be loved. The morning light shifts across the table between us, illuminating coffee cups and folded newspapers and the ruins of assumptions we've both been too afraid to examine. I don't tell her about Julian. This isn't a confession of infidelity. It's something deeper, more fundamental. It's the acknowledgement that the person she married never fully existed, that I've been offering her a performance of love rather than love itself. It's the recognition that kindness is not always kind, that sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone is continue to lie to them when the truth might set you both free. Vanessa doesn't cry. She doesn't rage or demand explanations or throw dishes against the wall. She simply nods slowly, her face collapsing not with tears, but with the terrible weight of finally understanding what she has always known but never allowed herself to believe. That night, my wedding ring sits on the kitchen table between the salt and pepper shakers, a small circle of gold that once symbolized forever but now marks the end of one story and the beginning of another I don't yet know how to tell. The car sits in the driveway for 3 days before I find the courage to put the key in the ignition. During those 72 hours, I exist in a strange suspension between my old life and whatever comes next. Vanessa and I move through the house like polite strangers, speaking when necessary about practical matters. Who will pick up David from baseball practice? Whether the mortgage payment has been made? What to tell the neighbors who ask why I'm sleeping in the guest room? She doesn't ask me to leave, and I don't offer to go. We exist in the careful space of people who understand that some conversations require time to ripen, that some decisions cannot be rushed even when their inevitability has already been acknowledged. David notices the change, but doesn't comment. The way teenagers do when the adult world shifts beneath their feet in ways they don't yet have words to describe. On Thursday morning, I call the school and tell them I need a personal day. Then I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that grows cold while I stare at my wedding ring, which has been sitting in the same spot for 3 days like an accusation I haven't figured out how to answer. I think about Julian, alone at the cabin, probably sorting through the last of Uncle Eli's belongings, or maybe just sitting on the porch with a book, existing in the patient way of someone who has learned that the most important things cannot be forced. I think about the cassette tape, which I've hidden in my desk drawer at school like contraband, afraid to bring it home where Vanessa might find it and understand exactly what kind of truth I've been carrying. But mostly I think about the man I used to be before I learned to edit myself, before I discovered that authenticity was a luxury I couldn't afford. The young man on that recording who believed his love was worth preserving, worth speaking aloud, even if only to an empty room and a microphone that might or might not be listening. The drive north feels different this time, not like flight, but like return. I carry nothing except the cassette tape and the clothes I'm wearing, as if anything more would suggest a lack of faith in whatever waits for me at the end of this journey. The mountains rise to meet me with the same indifferent majesty they've shown for centuries, and I understand that my small human drama means nothing to them, which somehow makes it feel more significant rather than less. The cabin appears around the final bend in the road like a question mark, exactly as I left it a week ago, but somehow transformed by my decision to return. Julian's car is in the driveway, and smoke rises from the chimney in a thin gray line that speaks of occupancy, of someone choosing to stay rather than simply passing through. I park beside his Honda and sit for a moment with the engine off, listening to the familiar sounds of wind through pine branches and the distant murmur of the creek running behind the cabin. These are the sounds of my truest self, I realize, Not the suburban quiet of Maple Street with its carefully maintained lawns and the hum of central air conditioning, but this wilder music that speaks to something in me I thought I'd successfully silenced. Julian appears on the porch before I've worked up the courage to get out of the car. He's holding a book, one finger marking his place, and he looks at me with the same patient attention he showed that first night when the storm brought us together again. There's no surprise in his expression, no dramatic relief or overwhelming joy, just the quiet recognition of someone who has been waiting without expectation, understanding that some decisions cannot be hurried. We don't embrace immediately. Instead, we stand on opposite sides of the gravel driveway and look at each other across the space that has defined us for 24 years, close enough to matter, far enough to ache. He's wearing the same flannel shirt he had on the day I left, and I wonder if this is coincidence or intention, whether he's been waiting for me to return or simply living his life with the door left open. I'm older somehow in just a week, aged not by time, but by the weight of finally choosing truth over safety. The man who drove away from this cabin 7 days ago was still negotiating with himself, still believing that courage was optional. The man standing here now understands that some kinds of honesty are not choices but necessities, as essential as breathing. Julian closes his book and sets it on the porch railing, then opens the cabin door without a word. The gesture is simple, practical, an invitation without pressure, an acknowledgement that whatever happens next will happen inside, in the place where we first learned to speak each other's names without shame. I follow him into the cabin, leaving my old life in the car like luggage I no longer need. The interior smells the same, old wood and coffee, and something indefinable that might be possibility itself. Julian has cleaned up the last of Uncle Eli's belongings, and the space feels both empty and full, ready for whatever story we're brave enough to write. We sit at the same kitchen table where we shared wine and confessions, where he played the cassette tape that reminded me who I used to be before I learned to be afraid. But this time, when the lights flicker and threaten to go out, we don't wait for darkness to close the distance between us. This time, there's no space left to close. Later, much later, we sit by candlelight again, not because the power has failed, but because some conversations require the intimacy of uncertain light. Julian's hand rests on the table between us, palm up, and I understand that this is not an ending but a beginning. Not the conclusion of one story, but the first sentence of another we'll write together, one honest word at a time. Outside, the wind picks up again, promising weather. But inside, in the circle of light where we sit with our hands finally touching and our futures spread before us like blank pages, the only storm that matters has already passed.